We get phone calls from unknown numbers all the time. We ignore them. We block them. We don't think twice about it. But what if you picked up? What if you answered a call meant for someone else, or someone pretending to be someone else? What if that one decision changed everything? Today's story is about a woman who watched her sister answer a phone call and witnessed the exact moment her sister stopped being the person she had always meant for her. And the person who came back downstairs was not quite the same person who went up. This isn't a metaphorical statement. I know how it sounds. I'm aware that it reads like I'm describing a shift in personality or emotional state. But I need you to understand that what I witnessed was something beyond that. Claire went upstairs at 8:47 p.m. on a Friday evening in November. She had her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking to someone. She was saying yes. Yes to something. Yes to a question I didn't hear because the call had connected as she was walking away from me. I was in the kitchen. I was making tea. The kettle was running. The kitchen was warm and ordinary. Through the doorway, I could see Claire crossing the living room toward the stairs. She had her hand on the banister. She was looking at her phone, but her expression was strange. Not quite surprised. Not quite afraid. Something in between. Then she looked at me. Our eyes met for just a moment. A fraction of a second. But in that moment, I saw something in her face that I had never seen before. It wasn't her fear. It wasn't her confusion. It was something that was using her face to look back at me. Something that was already here, already present, looking out from behind her eyes. She said, "I have to take this upstairs." Her voice was the same. The tone was the same. The inflection was hers. But there was something underneath it. Something that made the words land differently in my ears. Like she was speaking a language I could almost understand, but not quite. Then she climbed the stairs. I heard her footsteps on the second floor. I heard her bedroom door open. I heard her bedroom door close. I heard the lock engage with a soft and shut itself off automatically. I stood in the kitchen for about a minute staring at the water. Not moving. Not thinking. Just existing in that space between normal and wrong. Then I went to the bottom of the stairs and called up to her. "Claire? You okay?" There was no response. I waited a reasonable amount of time. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. I told myself she was still on the phone. I told myself that's why she wasn't answering. I made my tea and sat on the couch in the living room and tried to watch television. But I couldn't focus on the screen. I kept listening to the silence from upstairs. There was no sound of her voice. No murmur of conversation. Nothing. Just complete silence coming from her locked bedroom. I went back to the stairs. "Claire." Still nothing. "Claire, I'm coming up." I climbed the stairs slowly. The hallway was dark except for the light spilling from my own bedroom at the far end. Her door was closed. Locked. No sound from inside. I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder. "Claire, open the door." Nothing. I put my ear against the door and tried to listen. I could hear something. A sound. But it wasn't her voice. It sounded like breathing. Heavy breathing. Like she had been running. "Claire, you're scaring me. Open the door." The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. It was absolute. It was the kind of silence that belongs in spaces that should be empty. I went to my own room and got my master key. The lock on her door was old. The key opened it from the outside. I had it in case of emergency. This felt like an emergency. I opened the door. My sister had come to live with me 3 months earlier. Her name was Claire. She was 28 years old. She was a graphic designer, or she had been until her company downsized and eliminated her position. She was also freshly out of a 5-year relationship with someone who had not treated her well, and the combination of job loss and heartbreak had left her in a state of profound depression. I had told her she could stay as long as she needed. I had a guest room. I had the space. I had the inclination to help. We were only 2 years apart in age. We had always been close, the way siblings can be when they're children and then drifted apart, the way siblings do when they become adults with their own lives. Living together had brought us back together in some ways. We would have breakfast before she would start applying to jobs. We would watch movies in the evening. We would talk late into the night about relationships and failure and the general terror of being in your late 20s with your life feeling like it was falling apart. She was a good house guest. She wasn't depressed in a way that was angry or demanding. She was depressed in a way that was quiet and withdrawn. She would spend entire days in her room. When she came downstairs, she would apologize for being a burden. I would tell her she wasn't. She wouldn't believe me, but she would nod and pretend to. In the previous week, I had noticed a subtle shift. She had started going to interviews. She had started applying for new positions. There was a fragile kind of hope in her voice when she talked about potential jobs. She was sleeping better. She was eating better. She was starting to look like the person she had been before the layoff, that maybe she was going to be okay. That was the night the call came. I don't know who was calling. I didn't recognize the number on her phone. She had glanced at it when it rang, and I saw her face shift. That's when I knew something was wrong. She looked like someone who had been expecting a call they were dreading. She looked like someone who had been waiting for something and was relieved and terrified that it had finally arrived. She answered it immediately. She didn't let it go to voicemail. She picked it up on the first ring and pressed it to her ear, and she walked away from me without saying hello to whoever was on the line. Later, when I was explaining this to the police, they asked me if I had heard her say anything. They asked me if I had heard any words from her side of the conversation. I told them no. The only word I had heard was yes. Just yes, said once, said with a kind of resignation that made my stomach hurt. When I opened her bedroom door and found it empty, I wasn't surprised. Some part of me had already understood that she wasn't there. Some part of me had already registered the wrongness of the situation and adjusted my expectations accordingly. But the room was truly empty. She wasn't in the closet. She wasn't in the bathroom. The window was closed and locked from the inside. There was no way for her to have left except through the door. I stood in her room for several minutes trying to understand what I was seeing. The phone was on her bed, just sitting there. The screen was dark. The call had ended. I picked it up and checked the call log. The incoming call had come from a number that didn't exist. That's not how I would have described it at the time, but that's what it was. The number was 1-800-1-800-1-800, repeating the same 4 digits over and over. A number that couldn't be real. The call duration showed 0 seconds. She had been on the phone. I had watched her answer it. She had gone upstairs and locked herself in her room and stood there breathing heavily for minutes. But the phone showed that the call had lasted 0 seconds. I called her name again. I searched the house. I looked in the basement. I looked in the garage. I looked in every closet and under every bed. She was gone. I called the police at 9:15 p.m. The operator asked me when she had last been seen. I told her approximately 8:47 p.m. The operator asked me if she might have just stepped out. I told her she had locked herself in her room and then disappeared from a locked room with no other exits. There was a pause. The operator asked me if I had checked for signs of struggle. I told her I had. There were none. The operator asked me if my sister had been suicidal. I told her she had been depressed but not suicidal. She had been getting better. The police arrived about an hour later. They searched the house. They found nothing. They interviewed me extensively. They asked me about Claire's mental state. They asked me about her relationships. They asked me if she had any reason to run away. I told them about the phone call. I showed them the phone. I showed them the impossible call log. The officer, a woman named Detective Hayes, looked at me very carefully and asked me if I was certain about what I had seen. I told her I was absolutely certain. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her face. She was looking at a woman who had just lost her sister and whose grief was making her see things that didn't make sense. She was looking at someone whose mind was already creating explanations for an inexplicable situation. She was probably right, but I knew what I had seen. For 2 weeks. They filed a missing person report. They contacted her ex-boyfriend. They contacted her former employer. They contacted every friend of hers that they could find. No one had heard from her. No one had any explanation for where she might have gone. There were no sightings. There were no charges on her credit cards. Her car was still in my driveway. Her bank account remained untouched. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. I would walk through the house at night and stand in her room and try to understand what had happened. The phone was still there. Still on her bed. I had the police take it, but they returned it after they found nothing on it. They had checked the call history. They had checked her contacts. They had looked for any message or note or evidence of communication. There was nothing. About 2 weeks after she disappeared, I received a call on my own phone. The number was the same impossible number. 1-800-1-800-1-800. I was alone in the house when it rang. I stared at my phone for a long time, watching it ring. I didn't want to answer it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to answer it. I answered it anyway. There was silence on the other end. Not the kind of silence that comes from a bad connection or an empty line. The kind of silence that comes from someone breathing, someone listening. I said, "Who is this?" The silence continued for several seconds. Then I heard something that made my blood go absolutely cold. I heard my sister's voice, but it wasn't speaking. It was breathing. The same heavy breathing I had heard through her locked door the night she disappeared. Breathing that sounded labored. Breathing that sounded like it was coming from somewhere very far away, or through something that was distorting it, or from someone's mouth that didn't quite work the way human mouths are supposed to work. The next time that number called, and the next time, there were several calls, always from that same number, always silence or heavy breathing on the other end. After about a week, the calls stopped, but something else started happening. I would find things moved in the house. Small things. Picture frame turned around. A book removed from a shelf and placed on a table. A coffee mug placed upside down on the kitchen counter. I told myself I was doing these things myself and forgetting. I told myself I was losing time. I told myself my grief was making me unstable. But I knew I wasn't doing it. One night, I found a word written on the bathroom mirror. Written in the fog from the shower. A single word written in letters that trembled slightly. Help. I stared at that word for a very long time. Then I took a shower and it washed away. The next morning, I woke up and found Claire's phone sitting on my pillow. I had left it on the kitchen table the night before. I was absolutely certain of that. But there it was on my pillow, the screen dark, waiting. I turned it on. The only thing on it was a note, written in the Notes app, written in the middle of the night while I was asleep. It said, "I'm coming back, but not the way you think. Not the way I left. Please don't be afraid when you see me. Please just let me in." I deleted the note. I deleted the entire phone. I drove to a landfill and threw it away myself. But I knew that whatever was happening, getting rid of the phone wasn't going to stop it. My sister was coming back. And the call I had heard in that breathing, the presence I had felt on the other end of that line, it wasn't my sister. Not anymore. It was something that had been where Claire was. Something that had taken her when she answered that impossible phone call. And now it was wearing her voice, learning her habits, preparing to return to the house as if nothing had happened.
3 weeks
And I
after
didn't
the
know how to
disappearance,
stop it. There was a knock on my front door. I was sitting on the couch. It was late, nearly midnight. I hadn't been expecting anyone. The knock was soft, tentative, like someone wasn't sure if they wanted to be let in. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Claire. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing the night she disappeared. Her hair was styled the same way. She had the same expression on her face. She looked exactly like my sister in every conceivable way. I didn't open the door. "Claire," I called through the wood. "Emma," she said. Her voice was perfect. It was exactly her voice. The cadence was right. The tone was right. "I'm so cold. Please let me in." I stood at the door trying to decide what to do. "Where have you been?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. I answered the phone and then I was somewhere else. Somewhere so dark I couldn't see. And I heard voices. So many voices. All of them were saying my name. All of them wanted me to come closer. And I walked toward them because I was so afraid of being alone. I didn't move. "Emma, please. I'm frightened. I want to come home." Every word sounded like something my sister would say. Every inflection was hers. But I could hear something underneath the words. Something that was mimicking her speech patterns but wasn't quite getting them right. Like someone speaking a language they had learned phonetically but didn't truly understand. "I need you to tell me something only you would know," I said through the door.
When we were kids,
There was a long
you hid my
pause. Favorite toy in the backyard because I wouldn't let you play with it. You buried it under the tree in the corner. It was a small purple dog. Do you remember? That was true. That had actually happened. But it wasn't something I had told anyone else. It wasn't something that anyone but Claire and I would know. "I remember," Claire said through the door. "I was so mean to you. What's the name of the dog?" I asked. Another pause. "Mr. Whiskers," she said. But she was wrong. The dog's name had been Princess. A completely ridiculous name for a small purple toy dog. But that's what I had called it. I had called it Princess and Claire had known that. Every memory I had of her mentioned it by that name. She had gotten it wrong. "I'm sorry," she said through the door. "I'm confused. My head is so confused. Please let me in. I'm so cold." "No," I said. "Emma, please." "You're not my sister." There was a very long silence. So long that I thought she had left. Then I heard something that made my entire body go rigid with fear. I heard her laughing. But not from outside the door. I heard her laughing from behind me, inside the house. I spun around. The living room was empty, but I could still hear her laughing. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere. It was coming from inside my own head. I turned back to the door and looked through the peephole again. She was still there, still standing on my porch, still wearing Claire's clothes, still wearing Claire's face. But now I could see what I had missed before. Her eyes weren't quite right. They were the same shape, the same color, but there was something behind them that was too aware. Something that was looking out at me with an intelligence that human eyes don't contain. She said through the door, "I'm not your sister. Not anymore. But I will be. I'm learning. Every moment I'm here, I'm learning more about what she was. And soon I'll be so much like her that you won't be able to tell the difference. And then I can stop pretending. And then I can let the others in too." "What others?" I whispered. "The ones who are still waiting in that space between the ringing and the answer. The ones who are listening on the other end of every call. There are so many of them, Emma. So many people calling and calling, trying to reach someone who will answer. And every time someone picks up that phone, we get a little closer. We learn a little more. We practice being a little better." I went to the kitchen and got a knife. I came back and stood at the door. "Go away," I said. "I'm going to come in eventually," she said. And her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "You can't keep the door locked forever. And when I do come in, when I'm finally able to walk through this house the way she walked through it, I'm going to be so grateful. I'm going to be so hungry. And Emma, I'm going to need to know everything she knew. Every memory, every moment, every secret. I'm going to need to consume all of her so that no one can ever tell that she's gone." I sat at the kitchen table with the knife in front of me and I watched the door. She didn't try to come inside, but I could feel her presence on the other side. I could feel her learning the shape of my house, learning the sounds it made, learning the rhythm of my life so that she could eventually replace herself into it, and I would have nowhere to hide from the fact that my sister was gone and something else had stolen her place. By morning, she was gone. She had disappeared from the porch sometime during the night. The police came when I called them. They found no evidence that anyone had been there. They found no footprints. They found no sign of disturbance. One of the officers looked at me with such profound pity that I couldn't bear to meet his eyes. I knew what they thought. They thought I had fabricated the entire visit. They thought Claire's disappearance had broken something in me. They thought I was creating evidence of paranormal phenomena because the alternative explanation was too painful. Maybe they were right, but I know what I saw looking out of my sister's eyes. Claire disappeared. The police eventually stopped looking. The case went cold. Life moved on in the way that life does when someone vanishes and there's no explanation and no closure and nothing to do but accept that sometimes people are simply gone. I've learned to live with the empty guest room. I've learned not to look inside it. I've learned to keep my phone on silent and check the caller ID before I answer anything. I've learned to be afraid of ringing sounds in ways I never was before. But mostly I've learned to be afraid of the girl who looks like my sister and lives in my house now. She came back 3 months ago. She simply appeared in the living room one afternoon as if she had always been there. She said hello and asked if there was anything to eat. She asked if she could take a shower. She said she was tired and wanted to rest. And I didn't stop her. Couldn't stop her. She has my sister's face. She has my sister's voice. She knows things that Claire knew. She can talk about our childhood and our parents and memories that only we shared. But every so often, I catch something in her expression that isn't quite right. I hear a word choice that my sister would never make. I notice her moving through the house in ways that are slightly off, like she's still learning the layout. The police came again when I called and told them that my sister had returned. I told them I thought something else had come back to a psychiatric hospital. I spent 2 weeks there. They put me on antipsychotics. They told me that Claire had likely never left, that she had been hiding somewhere in the house the entire time, that her reappearance was evidence of a psychotic break on my part, not evidence of anything paranormal. When I got home, She was waiting for me. We live together now. I go to work. She goes through my sister's old job applications, but she doesn't seem very interested in actually getting a job. She mostly stays home. She watches me. She learns from me. And every night when I go to sleep, I leave my bedroom door locked. Last week, my mother called. She wanted to know how Claire was doing. She wanted to know if she had found a job yet. She wanted to know if she could come visit. I lied. I told her everything was fine. I told her Claire was doing better. I told her she could visit next month. What I didn't tell her was that every single time my mother calls, the girl who looks like my sister watches me with an intensity that makes me understand that she's still learning. She's still studying what it means to be human. She's still practicing. Last night, the phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer it. But the girl, the thing wearing my sister's face, she stood up and looked at the phone with an expression that I can only describe as hunger. She said, "I should take that." And in that smile, I saw something that had nothing to do with my sister. Something patient. Something that was almost ready. She said, "Soon you won't be able to stop me." And the worst part is, I don't think she's wrong. I think she's almost learned everything she needs to learn. And I think there's someone on the other end of that phone call waiting for her to finally answer. I think she's going to pass the call to someone else. And I think I'm going to be standing right here when she does, and I won't be able to do anything to stop it. Because by then, I won't be sure anymore if the person doing the passing is still the thing that took my sister, or if it's finally become her so completely that I'll have to let it in. And that uncertainty, that horrible gray space between knowing and not knowing, is where something else is already waiting. 3 a.m. Scary Stories podcast. If you want more eerie, unsettling, and unforgettable stories like this, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, keep your doors locked, keep your eyes open, and try not to wake up at 3 a.m.